Complacency is the enemy. Compassion is the catalyst. They call it troublemaking. We call it the blueprint. Welcome to the Unapologetic Disruptor for Good, the podcast for the restless, the relentless, and the ones too loud to be ignored. We aren't asking for permission to change the world. We're just doing it. My name is Matthew Portel, and I am the host of the Unapologetic Disruptor for Good podcast. Let's get uncomfortable. All right, here we are back with episode 2.2 of the relaunch of the Unapologetic Disruptor for Good podcast. I am so excited to be back. So much awesome opportunity to speak to incredible people, and today is definitely no different. And we were 2021 that time, and a lot has happened since then, and so we're going to get into it in a minute, but I want to welcome everybody back. This is the second episode of the relaunch. Last week I talked to Sean Pritchard from Inhabit. We did some mindful breathing. He talked about the science around breathing and all of the amazing things that happen to our brains and bodies. And I will tell you, I have to admit, I got back into my habit of doing some mindful breathing in the morning using an incredible app, and it was not Inhabit. I'm about to subscribe to that. And if you all remember last week, if you put in Disruptor, you get a month free on his platform of Inhabit. So can't wait to start that. But I have done my own mindful breathing, and it has been a great jump back into a habit that I needed to be doing anyway, especially being actively as a principal in schools. It is a day-to-day experience for sure, as we are navigating life with the kids that we get the honor and privilege of being with. So speaking of being a principal, because that's kind of important, today's guest is also an active principal. So Dr. Michael Gaskell is an author, speaker, and principal in East Brunswick. He models the pursuit of lifelong learning as he mentors new principals through the New Jersey Leader to Leaders program. An NJPSA Stars recipient, he presents on AI in the classroom and the NJPSA FEA at Rutgers. He has been published in over 6 dozen education journals and blogs, including ASCD Smartbrief, Tech and Learning, Education Post, eSchoolNews, NASSP, Edtech, and currently writes a monthly column for ASCD Smartbrief. And he made the most read section of ASCD Smartbrief. That's pretty incredible, because that is a great resource for educators and principals out there. Mike presents at national conferences, including the Learning and the Brain Conference in November of 2021, the FTC in January of 2022, January of 2023, 24, 25, and 26, he presented as well. He was the CEC in January of 23, and many others. He's been on a podcast, including Larry Ferlazzo's Education Week Classroom Q&A. And Mike has published 3 books: Radical Principles, Leading Schools Through Trauma, and Microstrategy Magic. Dr. Gaskell supports instructional excellence and student success for all. And more importantly, he is a return guest on what was the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast, which is now the Unapologetic Disruptor for Good podcast. So Mike, welcome to the podcast. Welcome back after many years. How are you? Catch us up on the many years it's been, and just tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, great to be back, Matt. And I thank you for inviting me back. Wow, yeah, it's been a half a decade. That ages us, doesn't it? But we were riffing a little bit backstage beforehand about our experiences as principals, and it really does reinforce your work. I'm so happy to be here supporting it, because we can't talk enough about ways to help kids and do some disruptive and unapologetic work. That was a lot of what I wrote about in Radical Principles, which was after after that last podcast. And I had a lot of fun writing about how to work around bureaucracy and institutionalized, ways that can really blockade how we can help kids. So really innovative things to think about. It's the old beg for forgiveness rather than ask for permission mantra. And I had a lot of fun writing that book, which was right after Leading Schools Through Trauma, which I think I was working on when we last met. So there's been a couple books. And then, as you said, I mean, I'm loving still writing. And now I'm in the, I do a monthly column, as you said, for ASCD Smartbrief, and also Tech and Learning. I have a lot of fun with both of those. They give me a lot of discretion on both of them. And that wasn't always the case as a writer. You know, when you start out as a writer, people were very concerned about how you might come across. And when I started getting lucky and there was some most reads and all that, suddenly everybody thought I knew what I was talking about, and they didn't have to edit my work as much, which was kind of fun because I could basically speak from my heart, which is what all this work's about. So much of this, and you know, I talked backstage again about how I like to weave studies and stories together, because I think when you're looking at studies, and I think we have gotten either questioned too much on this or gone away from it in our current climate, we need to rely on time-tested methods. And there's some really great stuff out there that you and I were chatting about that I'm sure we'll bring up now, because I could just go on and on about some of these old and newer studies that just keep proving the same thing, which are these really practical ways to help children that are struggling, that are at risk, that are traumatized, and all the above.
You know, I always say it's not rocket science, but it is brain science, right? And
Exactly.
it is complicated, but yet it is fundamentally, I think, what we all got into education to do, and that is to have an impact and make tons of money. That is a joke. Nobody
Yeah, exactly.
into education for money by any means, but it is really about that connection, right? And we did talk about some of those tried and true things. And, you know, we also, before we came live, we were talking about pedagogy and, you know, how these tried and true things that we know, we're in this interesting time where now I've been in education 2 decades, and I've seen the cycle. And, you know, when I remember getting an education, they would say, oh, just wait, it'll come back around.
Yeah.
I've seen those cycles now work through many, many times. And I think the one that we know for sure is the most imperative is relationships. Without a doubt, it is about trusting relationships with accountability, because having those two things are really important. It's not about being students' best friends. It's about building strong, stable relationships with trust and accountability. And you've written a lot about yourself being a principal and being a disruptor, and basically is what you were saying. Tell us more about that, because I certainly connect in, I call it unconventional ways of getting things done, which means that I ask for forgiveness and not so much permission. And then I try to find the nuance to weasel my way through the bureaucracy to get what the students at my school need, and the teachers for that matter. But tell us a little bit about your books, and especially the one you were talking about, and what are some examples of those type of things that you've done?
Yeah, so a really good example was referenced, I think, in both of my last 2 books. It's one of my favorite things, and this is the old "be so good they can't ignore you" 2 routine. And we had a unique situation in the middle school I was a principal at the time, and my superintendent called me and said, we have to move the 200 preschoolers into your middle school. And I said, I don't have any room. And he said, figure it out, which sounds familiar, right? And I said, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And I figured it out. And we brought 200 preschoolers into my middle school. And people were worried, you know, like, is it going to be okay? Are they going to be safe? The whole 9 yards. And there were, you know, kids in my middle school who were at risk, who had some challenges, who had been in some trouble before. And you and I were talking earlier about how it's hard to move some educators from, you know, implicit bias or subconscious bias, whatever you're going to call it. And I can remember there was this kid who, he was too big. He was a person of color. He talked too loud and he ran too fast. And there were these, you know, teachers, these little old ladies who would go waving a finger up at him. And that doesn't work with a kid like that. So one day I said to him, I just took a chance. I said, do you want to read to the preschoolers? And I thought he was going to use language that you shouldn't use in a school and tell me to go take a hike. And instead he said, I would love to do that. And he had a smile ear to ear. And I said, if you have a good week, I'm going to let you do this. And he had a good week. And I brought him into the preschoolers. And one of the best things about preschoolers is they're like pet therapy. Everybody loves how excited they are, their
Yeah.
energy. And this works for big, tough, 13-year-old middle school kids who are 6 feet tall as well. And he came in and he read Pete the Cat, which was kind of ironic because you talk about, a special character there who just needed some love. And, the kids were high-fiving him. They were hugging him. And I said, if you want to keep coming back, keep being good. And he was a kid who would get suspended, 10 times a year. And he didn't get a single suspension from that point forward in that year. And then I started to think to myself, I've got something here. And we called it Middles to Littles. And I started recruiting other kids who were at risk. And at first, some of those old school educators were like, you're rewarding him and he's a bad kid in that routine. You know the routine. And I said,
I know it well.
Yeah. And I said, let's see what happens. And a few weeks go by, and I noticed those teachers going up to him when he was running too fast in the hall and saying, hey, when are you reading again? And guess what? They didn't even direct anything at him. And suddenly he stopped running, he stopped yelling, and he went to class and said, oh, I'm going to read on Tuesday if I'm good. So it was that kind of reinforcer that was helping kids like this. And my suspension rate plummeted to a third what it had been in that school, mainly because of programs like that. And that was my goal. It was to target ways that I knew I could make kids like that feel like they were part of something larger than themselves, which I talked about in a study I referenced because I love this study. It was the Quai study. So if you give me like a 2-minute drill on this, I'll talk about this awesome study that was done from the 50s to the 90s. It was this massive longitudinal study. And the reason I'm bringing this up is if you have something that's larger than yourself, and if you have a mentor in your life, you only need one more thing. And that's what this study confirmed. So this was this really cool study on this island called Kauai in Hawaii. And there were 800 newborns. And out of that, a third of them, it was a pretty high poverty island at the time, were identified as at risk because they were poor, their family, had some difficult circumstances, whatever the thing was. And they tracked these kids over 40 years, and they found that of those 200 at-risk kids, 70 of them thrived by the time they were in their 40s. And they started to scratch their heads and say, what do these kids have that the other ones didn't? And why did it work for them? That's a really massive number of kids who thrived, 1/3 of them that were not supposed to. And they found that there were 3 factors. The first one was they had a mentor or a coach or somebody that was an adult figure in their life other than their parents that was a strong figure. You think about teachers and coaches, we have all that in schools. The second thing was they were part of something larger than themselves, like I just said about Middles to Littles, and they were part of a team or a church affiliation or something. And then the third thing was assumed to be internal, but we now know we can teach this, and that was resilience. So if you have these 3 factors and you're at risk, you're likely to thrive, just based on this massive 40-year study of hundreds of kids in Hawaii. And this has been replicated time and again. You and I were talking about this. We keep seeing this stuff in the research, and yet people aren't using it or they're not aware of it. So it's important to bring attention to really cool things like this to help kids.
And it made me think too. I am a firm believer, and my previous school, we implemented The Leader in Me, which is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And I really am a firm believer in empowerment of kids and trusting them, even if they've made bad decisions in the past, but giving them an opportunity to shine, trusting them to do it. And if they make a mistake, mentoring them through it. Right. And I think that is based off of my own experience. And it sounds like you and I had very similar experiences. I tell kids all the time, the reason I know how to be a principal is because I spent a lot of time with mine when I was in school. And so I remember the one adult that had that impact, that trusted me, gave me some responsibility. And if I messed up, didn't berate me, but then supported me through getting better decisions. And it connected what you just said. It connected to something that happened to me last week. Last year was my first year at my new school, and there was 2 students in one classroom, and they struggled intensely. Escalations, no self-esteem, felt like they couldn't do anything. And the teacher would come to me, and I kept saying, just let's do this together. Like, you're not on your own, and I'm going to support you. And we began to have these conversations, and I gave her the 2x10 strategy, 2 minutes a day, 10 days. Just let them come and talk to you about whatever they want, and let me give them a job. I want to give them a school-wide job, and I'm going to empower them to make decisions. So I made them part of my announcement crew. We have a full production in the morning, full news crew, right? Via Teams. And so fostered them. And then this year, I let them interview. I didn't interview. They interviewed the new kids coming in, and they hired the new crew that came in.
Yeah, I love it.
And so this last week we had, my school is in Nashville, but it is in a small community within the Nashville county. And we had the leadership of Goodlettsville. It's leadership Goodlettsville, so it's a little town. All the community members came in. And I didn't do the talking. I let the kids, because they're awesome, right? And he gets up in front of these adults and says, I'm a news broadcaster here at the school. And if sports don't work out, he wants to be an athlete. If sports don't work out, I know I can be a newscaster because I'm really good at it. And people tell me I'm great at it. And I'm telling you, I about fell over. My school counselor was crying because this student looked at himself in a completely different way than he did just a year prior. And all we did was give him the opportunity, let him shine, let him lead. And from behind, we didn't pull, we didn't push, we just kept there in that support. And I think that is so important in that resilience building. Is it's not done in isolation. You can't tell somebody, oh, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? It's done in community. It's done in support.
I love that
one. That's such a good one, right? Or work harder, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so that made me connect to that because it is really important. And we're operating in a different world that you and I didn't grow up in, right? And you've done a lot of work around AI and tech. And I would love to start talking about that, because I tell you, man, if between social media and cell phones with my 5th graders at school, they keep me busy in so many ways. And they're not always the greatest. So tell me about that work, because I think it is a space in which, as educators, we've really got to start digging into.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been writing a lot about recently about ethics, bias, and even like the companionship issues you see happening online. So I'll just start with I'll kind of work backwards here with the companionship thing. There was a study recently that showed that companionship, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly again, right, is not good for mostly teens, who are the kids who are, latching to what is like a synthetic human being through a chatbot, and is actually beneficial for the elderly if they're alone. And think about that. That's an interesting thing. So you've got, on one hand, it's not necessarily good for teens who need to develop and grow and interact socially and learn how to manage conflict. But for the elderly who are alone and have already developed all those skills, an AI companion is not necessarily a bad thing, at least not a decent one. So it's really important to be aware of that. I've done some really interesting research on AI in terms of ethics and bias. So I wrote some articles about bias specifically, and this hasn't changed. So it's interesting. When AI first came out, there were a lot of concerns about it being biased. And by the way, the AI itself is not biased. It's the internet ecosystem that is. And if people think that the internet ecosystem isn't biased, then they need to get a reality check, because it is. And that's the reality of it, because it's human nature to be biased. So what I did was and this is in an article that I wrote, I said, show me successful business people. And that was important to make sure I didn't genderize business people. But it genderized it for me. It showed me middle-aged white men, and someone else pointed out to me, and they're all thin, like images of them. And I said, no, show me diversity of successful business people. And then, with that prompt, it showed me some people of color, but predominantly men. So then I said, no, show me women and men that are diverse. And finally, I got this reality check representation of who successful business people are and can be. And I did the same thing with high school athletes. So I'm going to ask you if you know this. I asked it to show me a high school athlete. What do you think it showed me? 4 images of. Oh, I think you went mute or quiet.
A young black man.
Yeah, exactly. Bingo, you won the lottery. And 3 out of the 4 were that. So then I said, and by the way, the 4th person was not a female. So I said, no, diversity and female. And finally, I get the representation. The lesson in this is because the internet is biased, not the AI. The AI is just trying to please you. It's designed to please us. That's what it does. But it's got this remarkably imperfect productivity. And we have to be aware of that. We have to teach kids that and our teachers and staff. Because if we can teach them that, then we can teach them how to properly prompt systems so they're working around some of those challenges. There's a lot out there about AI right now. And again, I called the good, the bad, and the ugly. Look, AI is here. We can sit here and argue about whether it's bad or not, just like we used to about the calculator when I was in school, right? The reality is it's here. It's not going away. So how can we leverage it? And then more importantly, teach children and teachers who are teaching them how to properly use it. And, you talk about like plagiarism is a big issue now. But is it? Plagiarism has been an issue since assessment occurred, which goes back millennia, exactly. Right? It's always been here. Now there's just another tool. And there's always going to be a certain percentage of the population, whether you like it or not, small percentage, but nonetheless a percentage, who are going to find tools to cheat. That's the reality of it. Eventually, those people do get caught, by the way. Not necessarily the 1st or the 7th time, but they get caught by the 13th time. And I think that's an important lesson versus the majority of people that when they're taught to use tools like AI ethically, they do. That's just the law of averages. I found out that in all my research, typically 90% roughly of people are doing the right thing and want to do the right thing. And then the other 10% aren't. That's just the way the world works. And we have to accept that and then learn how to work around it.
And that's anything, right? That's the end when the internet, it's anything. And there's always going to be the negative side to anything. I will say, I've got to give Gemini a shout out right now of Google, because I typed in the image, in the create image, I typed in picture of successful business people, and it did make it extremely diverse.
So maybe that's improving now.
I'm impressed, but I did.
Because as of a couple weeks ago, that was still showing me the same stuff. So maybe it's evolving. I will tell you that when Gemini, which is Google's AI product, yes. And I'm not here to sell any product. You use what works.
Yeah, no, me neither. That's just the one I use.
Absolutely. And we're a Google district, so it makes sense. They used to be called Bard. I don't know if you remember this, but when they were Bard, they were trying to be so politically correct that an image of an African-American Nazi went viral. So that's how crazy that is, right? Mm-hmm. So they had to back off of that, and they're still trying to work it out, but maybe, who knows, maybe. And of course, every time you do a prompt, it's going to give you a new set of information. So you never know. Like you might have just hit the jackpot, or it might be getting better.
Isn't that funny how technology works, right? And you're right. It is not going anywhere. And it's the point in which, as educators, we cannot put our head in the sand and pretend it's not, and put our head in the sand and pretend that kids aren't effectively using it effectively. And of course, ineffectively, that's always going to be the case. But I'll be honest, it's changed my life. It's made me more efficient. It makes me more organized and prepared by using the various tools that is out there. And I don't think we're preparing a children for a world that doesn't have AI in it from here till whenever the end of whatever it is were to occur. But yeah, it is a powerful thing. But again, it's just like financial literacy. It's just like internet safety. We have to be, it's got to be in the forefront of, as educators, we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, because I'll be honest, I have to hand my phone to my 15-year-old sometime and say, tell me how to do this. And he's like, there. I'm like, okay, right. I'm to that age where I have to ask my teenage son to do things on my phone. And I remember my dad doing some of that. I didn't have a cell phone, obviously, when I was a kid, but computers or whatever. And we're preparing them for a world that we don't even know what it is at this point, because it's so rapidly changing when it comes to technology. So what do you see some of the barriers and the work that you do, especially around the tech in schools, that you're trying to push people through to get them to say, hey, let's move past this? Or how do you navigate the barriers of people embracing these changes?
I think that once you show them, I'm a tool guy, so I'll show them ways that are relevant to them. A really good example is you and I probably write a lot of letters of recommendation in May, right? For some reason, we get everybody to ask us at once. So I learned very quickly that I can get a resume, take out their identifiable information, and then put it back in after. And it takes about 5 minutes to write something I would have done in about 20. And then I go back and I do what I call personify it. By personify, what I mean is I put in specific examples of things I know that the AI doesn't. And I also get rid of some of those weird words like seamless that you see everywhere all over AI, and unwavering. I can't stand that word because you see it everywhere in AI. And I get rid of those words and I personify it so that it is authentic enough, but it's also saved me a lot of time. Time savers are a big thing for educators, and also, both efficiency and economy. I think those are the two things that if you can show some examples of those two things, and there's a lot of that out there. You and I are administrators, so what I just shared would be an administrative idea. But the other thing that teachers can do now is, of course, Notebook LM's the big Gemini Google product that once you show teachers how useful that is and what you can do with it, it's really neat. Of course, you've got the audio podcast that you've got these two podcasters riffing and sound very real, but they're AI generated voices, and you can interact with those AI voices. And so there's some really neat things you can do with Notebook LM. I even, as an administrator, put the district contract up there because I wanted to see if I was missing something. You're always saying, you hear people say, well, that's contractual, or that's required, or that's, you hear all that and you go, I don't even know anymore. So I had to go check. So I go ask the Notebook LM, and if it's in there, it'll go find it and tell me it's on page 7 and it's quoted as this, or it will say there is no such mention of this. And then I have some answers quicker that I can also get back to my staff. One of my favorite things that I like to say as a school leader is that when one of the things that AI does is it gets me out of my office and into classrooms. And that's where instruction is improved, in instruction and learning, not me sitting in my office. It's improved when I'm in classrooms, providing guidance, giving support, and being visible. So those are some of the advantages too. The Notebook LM does some great things with quizzes for teachers. I think one of the things about Notebook LM that teachers like is because AI in general is remember big data like 10 or 12 years ago? It was just too much, right? Well, that's the same thing with AI. AI is too much for most people. So they kind of just throw their hands in the air and say, we shouldn't use that. And that's the wrong approach. Instead, you should show them pretty useful walled gardens like Notebook LM, which really won't hallucinate because it's taking specific information out of things you put into it, links or articles or whatever, as long as they're legitimate resources.
For sure. And I know that differentiation is such a game changer when we're talking about using AI, of creating text on certain lexile levels with specific pointers that can align to the core text that they're using. I've seen teachers use it in such an amazing way. And I'll be honest, I wrote my whole SIP with it last year. I knew what I wanted. I put the main points and I said expand upon. And then I went back and refined it to ensure that it was aligned with what we wanted to do. And that took me about a third of the time that it would have taken us to do it without the tools, right? And I know one of the feedback I got is we know a lot of your newsletters are AI generated. And I said, you are absolutely correct. 100%. You do not want to see my raw writing because it's not the greatest. Even though I have one book already published by Harvard and the other one's coming out from Columbia University.
Congratulations.
In the words I say, I don't write good, right? That's just
so I like to say good writers have great editors.
And I've learned one of them now. That is exactly right. You don't have to be a great writer. You just have to have thoughts and be able to get that thought into context, right? But that is I tell them you don't want to read my raw writing. It's just
and every teacher's gotten the 17-page email of misunderstanding from a parent. So how do you reply to that? And so maybe you put that into, and of course, if you have Gemini in your school, it's walled garden, so it's not going to be shared. And Google swears on that, by the way. So you could share that and say, summarize the main concerns of this, because I don't have time, because I got to go home and cook for the kids and get the so-and-so to soccer practice and so on. And when you're doing things like that, you're saving time, but then it's also allowing you to reply in a more objective format than your human brain of defensiveness might want you to do, which is very good because it will keep you objective and to the point. So those are other ways that I think are very helpful for educators and for kids. Kids can learn how to use these tools in that way too when they're learning how to write.
Well, and I will tell you, I know an incredible social worker who has launched a AI bot program called Nuri, and it is a it's based in neuroscience, and it is a support that allows teachers to put in scenarios of students, and it will produce trauma-informed, healing-focused, human-centered ideas based off of scenarios to help interventions and supports with students. And when she started kind of rolling this out, I'm like, my goodness. And the original point was to actually submit students' IEPs, and it would schedule them into a master schedule. Now,
wow.
I can't wait till whenever somebody creates a master schedule creator for students with services, because my goodness, it's so archaic. My exceptional education teacher just went to the mapping day where the technology is literally a pen and a Post-it note and a big wall with time frames.
Analog.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is exactly right. But in these type of things take so much time and effort and brain power that just like you said, that can't be put into a classroom with students, that can't be put into a lesson that is specific for a small group. It's all of this effort is coming from us that we're now going, wait a minute, there's a more efficient way to do it, right? There's a more efficient way for us to do some of these tasks that we're required to do. So what do you see the future of this being? What do you see? What I mean, there is no foresight, right, of AI. It's traveling so quickly. But what do you see it being in education in the next few years?
Yeah, and I use the term walled garden, and I'll also use another term, source grounded materials. These are probably some of the best ways to avoid what people have heard of as either hallucinations or just really, the AI sounding confident and yet it's remarkably wrong, right? So a really great example of this is a lawyer who had brought some cases to some precedent cases that he wanted to share to defend his client to the judge, and they found out these were ChatGPT generated and hallucinated. So obviously he was in trouble. And so that's a really good example of he just prompted and said, show me a case like my clients, and the AI wanted to please them. They didn't have one, so they made it up. That's the problem. So you need to, use sources like NotebookLM and Gemini and, Claude and these other ones that everyone keeps talking about, ChatGPT, but be referring back to sources or asking the AI to prove with sources, and then click on those links and check them and teach kids how to do that. So those are some of the ways that I think moving forward, we'll be able to, use these things reliably, teach kids to research with AI, but do it ethically, right? And be crediting sources that are now linked to that. And, there's definitely a lot of ways to go back and, I was telling you about how hard it was to find some studies on trauma, specifically from social media companies. So I got to just divert a little bit to that, if you don't mind, because I know you have a large Australian audience, and I have to talk to my Aussie brothers and sisters for a minute. By the way, I've been to Australia 3 times myself, and New Zealand once. Love the area and love the spirit. And, there was this really cool Australian study done a few years back, and I'll find a link for it and you can put it in your notes for people to refer to. But it's really hard to find these studies because what happens is there's no money in them, so they get buried. And so in this case, there was a before, during, and after instruction of the consequences of bad social media behavior. And they found some. And it was a very curriculum structured oriented, which we don't have enough in the United States. You and I talked about this, on how to understand and use social media. Just like we're talking about AI. AI is just the next big thing with the impact of social media on kids. And these kids didn't just show positive signs hours or days later. They showed it months beyond. They were going back and checking 6, 7, 8 months later and seeing the kids were still making much more rational and logical decisions online, not using offensive language, not, shaming other people, not getting toxic. They were being very disciplined online, which is great because we know that schools, universities are now looking at kids' online social media behavior to make a determination whether they get it or not. There was that great study a few years back where, or excuse me, not a study, but a story where Harvard, 10 kids got into Harvard that got banned afterwards because they found they were doing unethical things online. And these are kids who've gotten into an Ivy League college. And so this is a great lesson for kids to say, look, you and I grew up in a generation where we were hidden. We didn't have to worry about this. They do.
Thank goodness.
Exactly, because the stories we could tell. But the reality of the situation is these kids have to be smarter about that, and they can be if we teach them, just like the Australian study shows us.
And that is, I have a 15-year-old, and I don't know if it's the best decision or not, but he doesn't have social media because it's just not for him. And I know him well enough. He is a high school athlete and he does really well in school. He has a great social life. It was just something that he hasn't engaged in. And we talk about things all the time. Once it's out there, it's always going to be out there. And one thing as a principal that I can say, even in the last, so I left the principalship in 2022, I think 2022, for a few years, consulted and did work for Pace's Connection. And then I came back, and I will tell you, it was a huge difference when I came back in just 2.5 years. Oh my goodness. I wasn't ready for it. And I mean, it was parents I had to have conversations with parents. It's an acquaintance. He's a detective for internet crimes against children, local police department. Actually, he speaks internationally on the topic. And I had him come to the school and said, can we do a parent night where you just, give some education to it? Mm-hmm. And not very many people came because people don't think they need it. But then we have issues, and they come in, and the parent, I'll hand the phone and say, hey, this is alleged. I can't look at it. Whatever. I don't know the passcode to get in. And this is an 8, 9, or 10-year-old child that has full access. So I've seen this huge shift where I don't know how much you manage, but I know that I manage a ton of online bullying, whether it's fake TikTok accounts or it is FaceTimes or text chains, or it is constant.
We'll even go into a Google Doc together in school and chat that way.
You are exactly right. And our kids are brilliant, right? And we have to give them the credit where it's due. They are brilliant. They figure out ways to use tools in ways that they think are in their best interest. Mm-hmm. But it is something that I will say made a major shift. And at some point, we're going to have to make it a priority in schools to have these conversations consistently. And how do we use the tools? Because they're not going anywhere. So we have to be more specific. But I love that you shared that, Australian. And that is, for those of you who do not know, the #1 city of listening to this podcast is Sydney. So shout out to Sydney.
Great city. Melbourne's great too, by the way, and so is Perth. I've been to all three.
Don't forget them all. Brisbane's really cool too, right?
They're all Brisbane. Sorry for those Brisbaneites. And I have been to Central Australia though, in Dunk Island. Great
awesome.
country.
But this work is spanning, right? And then whether it's the tech or the healing centered, human focused, trauma informed work, and it's taken off globally because I think we're all in the same space of we're just trying to figure it out, and we're trying to build. The word resilience is not one that I particularly use often, but that ability to navigate these changes that life brings in a way that is healthy and can move forward into a successful and connected life, right? That's the ultimate goal. And I think we use these tools, obviously, right? This podcast is listened to in over 100 different countries. It's been streamed almost 300,000 times. All because I'm using a platform, social media, that I'm using the podcast platform. I'm using tools that that we commonly talk to kids about, and it's dangerous, but we use them and we use them effectively. So there are ways we can do that. So if you're talking to a school that's like, hey, what can we do as a school, especially elementary school? What would be the first kind of guide you would guide them to say, or you would guide them to do?
With regard to how to manage some of those challenges?
Yeah.
I think it's important for kids to learn that technology is a part of their life. But as importantly, there are ways to use it ethically, and in ways that they've been raised. One thing I'll say about kids today is they're generally better behaved than when I was a kid. It's the truth. And I think that's because they've been taught, to treat children that are less fortunate better. And you see a lot more of this, and I call my generation the Charlie Brown generation, because you know how the adults just wah, 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 wah. Well, they didn't exist. They just said, go do your own thing and figure it out. Even in schools, we were like just trying to survive on our own. And there's much more diligence to attend to student issues now. And I think kids therefore are better at that. So if we can use that script to teach them how to manage their behavior, both online and with AI and everything else that's happening in their life and on the cell phones. There's a lot of attention, like right in my own state, especially about getting rid of cell phones in schools. And, we talked about this earlier. I don't even know if that's the solution, because they have cell phones and they're just going to go home and use them. And then, like you said, you're going to be dealing with bullying issues that happen at 7 o'clock at night, which has happened for you. I know it has. As well as noon, because, in fact, more so because they have more free reign. So we've got to teach them how to use this beyond their school day. And that's probably the most important lesson. I think I was mentioning earlier, and I know you're wrapping up soon, so I'll just mention this really quick. There was this study done, again, another buried study that you can't find if you Google it, but it's there, and I'm going to share the link, that was done by Instagram, of course, the parent company's Facebook. And they did a control group of kids who just were looking at images, teenage girls. And then they had a group that were exposed to reality images, images of what people really look like. And we were all, beautiful in our own way, but they were natural looking. And they found that these girls had much better self-confidence when they were looking at the real images. And again, just like the Australian study, that lasted for them. It didn't go away. So these are important lessons that when we're talking about how to teach kids, we got to go back to these things and find these things, because there's a lot of evidence out there. It just tends to get buried nowadays. But you and I are going to unbury it.
So when are you going to start your podcast? I've already named it, The Buried Studies. And all you would do is literally just come on 15 minutes and just talk about buried studies.
One of these, because I got a list of them. Like you said, we ran out of time, but I have like 4 more that we were going to talk about, that you just don't see these studies, and they prove it every time. It's consistent.
You got to start a podcast. I can show you. I know how to do it. It's not
okay.
Come on, you're a tech dude.
Let's do it.
We could do it together.
We're going to co-write that book too, so let's do that too.
Yeah, The Buried Studies and Real Stories from the Principal's Office. Like we've got this.
Use them.
Because I will tell you, I would listen to that podcast, because I am a research nerd in that space. I love listening to research and how it's interconnected, and how that things are constantly coming back to some core humanistic experiences, no matter how long it's been around. So I'm telling you, that needs to be your to-do list.
Potentially inspired me. I have to think about that.
Yeah, buried studies. You call it whatever you want. Put it into AI. It'll come up with a brilliant name, I promise you.
I hope somebody didn't copyright it in the last 2 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Michael, tell us as the last piece, what are you going to do to go out and unapologetically disrupt for good?
I think I'm going to teach kids that. I just wrote about this, so I'm going to just refer to a quote in this article that I just wrote. And it's all about teaching kids who are underdogs how to outrun people who doubt them. And unfortunately, we talked about this. There's even educators who have implicit bias. We have to teach them to try to look at this from a different lens. But we can teach kids that, and this is what I said in the article, when a doubter is in the room, you have to sit close by. And when they frown, you smile at them. And when they try to intimidate you, sit even closer. we can teach kids that, they'll be able to overcome anything because they're going to surprise that doubter. And unfortunately, there's too many doubters in the world. But once they do that, that doubter's not going to be able to keep up with them. That kid's going to thrive like the kid from middles to littles.
Let me tell you right now, that is like my life mantra. I swear to you, that right there, that quote, if I could tattoo it on my chest, I would. Well, I could, I guess. But that was been my mantra since I was about 22 to 23 years old. It took me 22 to 23 years to get to the point of I am who I am. I'm unapologetically who I am. You don't have to like me, but I'm still going to smile at you. I'm still going to show up in that space and say, hey, this is what we're doing. So on that note, you all, don't forget to go out and do something awesome and be an unapologetic disruptor for good.